Welcome to the Success in Africa podcast with Dr. Modupe, your weekly dose of leadership vitamins to make you successful in Africa.
Hello and welcome to the Success in Africa podcast, episode 11. My name is Dr. Modupe Taylor Pierce, and I am a scholar and practitioner of leadership and organizational development. Simply put, I study what makes people successful. I have been studying this for 3 decades with a particular focus on people in Africa. And in this podcast, I will share stories, lessons, and insights about people having success in Africa. Why this podcast? Because I am sick and tired of Africa being the poorest continent in the world. We are blessed with the greatest resource, young people. Africa will soon have the largest number of working age people in the world. And when these people achieve success, Africa's wealth will be unparalleled. Why? Because I don't know of too many Africans whose goal in life it is to die poor. Success in life is simply the achievement of a predetermined goal, whether that goal is creating employment for 10,000 people or transforming your country into a high-income country. This podcast has been created to help you to achieve it. So if you are serious about achieving success in Africa, I want you to subscribe to this channel. If you like this video after you have watched it, please click the like button. This podcast is brought to you courtesy of BCA Leadership, the largest leadership enhancement company in Africa. If you have questions that you want me to answer after watching this video, log on to BCA Online, the link is on the screen, and post your questions there. That is where I will respond to your questions. Today we are continuing with our 4-episode series on examining success tips for leadership in public sector. We are going to study an elected official who successfully managed to transform his home state from worst to first. He did this by cutting his expenses down, standing firm against special interests, and leveraging existing resources in his state instead of waiting for aid from external resources. His name is Peter Obi, former governor of Anambra State in Nigeria. Nigeria is Africa's most populous country, and by most accounts, it ranks near the top of the list of Africa's most corrupt countries. Yet, in the midst of this country emerged a governor of a state who is a successful and impactful leader. You see, Peter Obi was the governor of Anambra State in Nigeria from 2006 to 2014. Before becoming the governor of the state, he was a successful entrepreneur, making money in wines and spirits and sitting on high-profile boards, including serving as the chairman of the board of directors of Fidelity Bank. He decided to go into politics the day he saw local boys in Anambra State burn a man alive. As he puts it, I realized that the lunatics have taken over the asylum. And he decided that something needed to be done to restore sanity to society. The gubernatorial elections occurred in 2003, the one he contested in, but they were so riddled with fraud that it took 3 years of litigation for Peter Obi to be declared the winner. When he became governor, the administration of Anambra State was a mess. During the litigation process, those 3 years, young men had burned and looted the governor's house, the governor's lodge, the state judiciary building, and other public buildings. In his bid to oversee the repair of these buildings, the public buildings, Mr. Obi discovered that appropriations for the repair works had been grossly inflated. He slashed the expenditures, upsetting the existing political and public sector elite, who promptly impeached him in November 2006, barely 8 months into his term as governor, for failing to follow due process. He contested the impeachment and it was overturned by the court 3 months later. After overcoming the attempted impeachment, Mr. Obi devised and implemented a program of statewide development that would transform the state. He leveraged the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, to create a tailored development plan for Anambra State, which was called the Anambra Integrated Development Strategy. During his terms as governor, Mr. Obi determinedly oversaw the implementation of this plan, which included the re-establishment of law and order through the compensation, training, and equipment of police and security services, the severe reduction of graft and overspending through his personal example, and the enforcement of zero-based budgeting in the public sector, the courting and recruitment of large investors like SAB Miller and Innocence Motors to add to the tax revenue base of the state, the eradication of polio through significant investment in the primary health care, and the reduction in the cost of movement in the state through the completion of over 800 kilometers of roads, causing Anambra State to be judged as the state with the best road network in Nigeria by the Federal Ministry of Works. However, his biggest achievement was in turning around the state's education sector. When Mr. Obi first became governor, Anambra State was ranked 26th out of 36 Nigerian states in the West African Senior School Certificate Examination, otherwise known as WASC, conducted by the West African Examinations Council. By the time he completed his second term in 2014, the state was ranked number 1, first in the exam. How did he accomplish this? By making a number of policy decisions which made him, frankly, the enemy of powerful interests, including the National Union of Teachers. First, he announced and implemented the decision to hand over 18 expropriated parochial secondary schools and 1,040 primary schools back to their original owners, which were mainly the Catholic and Anglican missions, declaring that the day-to-day running of schools should not be done by the government. He limited the state's role to regulating the schools, providing capital and salary support to the schools, but insisted, against the will of some powerful interests, that the government should get out of the business of running schools. The second major policy change was to ensure that the money for the teachers went directly to the teachers and not through the local state education office, which had an unfortunate history of exacting unofficial toll charges on monies that were supposed to go to the teachers. As the quality of teachers increased with the increase in real salary of the teachers, and the quality of administration improved with the new management of the school by the original owners from whom the schools had been expropriated 4 decades ago, the learning outcomes improved and the quality of education skyrocketed, as evidenced by the improvement in state examination scores. How did Peter Obi achieve these amazing achievements in such a relatively short time? You see, he established and communicated a clear vision for the state, leveraging the brand equity of the Millennium Development Goals to create a vision for the state that was easily understandable by stakeholders both inside and outside the state. He established what behaviors were ideal and what were not by first demonstrating the ideal behaviors himself, and then rewarding those who demonstrated it and punishing those who did not. Mr. Obi eschewed the lavish spending on himself and his offices. He stopped it. He stopped state officials from spending lavish amounts of money on cars and offices, and instead ensured that the money was invested in the education and health and infrastructure of the state that would improve the ability of the state to attract job-creating investments. For example, one time when he was governor, he was being pressured to build a presidential lounge in Anambra State at an estimated cost of 500 million naira just to host then President Obasanjo for 1 week. He resisted it. He negotiated an agreement to vacate the governor's lodge for a week instead, allowing the president to stay there. Mr. Obi and his wife moved to a hotel, costing the state 200,000 naira instead of 500 million naira. You see, he appointed people of integrity to critical positions, and he ensured that those who would not keep their hands clean were disappointed from office. He was steadfast in his stewardship of the state's resources and succeeded in saving the state millions of dollars and leaving the state without crippling debt at the end of his tenure. He had the courage to say no to powerful constituencies that wanted to maintain the status quo of just a few people prospering at the expense of the masses. By doing this, he turned around the state's fortunes, left behind a state at the end of his terms that was not dependent on external aid. You see, the term beyond aid has become popular with elected officials in Africa today. Ghana beyond aid became a slogan that propelled the current Ghanaian president into power. Unfortunately, what President Akufo-Addo of Ghana failed to do was to recognize that to be successful in propelling your community or country beyond aid, the leader has to get his or her administration to learn to live within their means. And that will only happen when the leader leads by example, cutting down his own expenses. When you are a public servant and you are not willing to let go of the luxuries and suites of office, when your administration is unable to generate sufficient revenue to cover its own expenses, then you will never get your country or your community to be beyond aid. You see, moving from being aid dependent to being aid independent first requires the discipline to limit your own expenditure. Then the expenditure of your most powerful allies in public service. And then you can raise revenues by attracting investors who will increase the tax base by investing in your community. They will invest in your community or your country because they have seen that you and your team are disciplined enough to control your own spending, which will give them the confidence that you and your team are people who keep their promises. When that happens consistently, you will be able to walk in Peter Obi's footsteps and convert your district or your community or your state or your country from last to first. This brings us to the end of our podcast today. I look forward to reading your comments and feedback about this podcast. Next week, I will share with you another important key to achieving success in Africa in the public sector. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and like this video. Tell your friends about it. Together, we can transform our beloved continent. See you next week.
Tomorrow belongs to those people who prepare for it today. See you next week.